Hello guys, welcome back. So I wanted to make a video for you guys. I know my lovely bath hair, I apologize. It takes forever and a day to dry. But for as many times as people have made God spousing articles, and I hate that. I'd rather say spirit marriage, anything else, but as many articles have been made, I've realized there's a lot of common sense stuff we leave out just because technology and the age of people using it has developed so quickly and people are getting younger and younger and younger. So we need to put some ground rules in place we didn't need just like say a decade ago. We need these ground rules in place now. First things first, that nobody ever says, and I probably never said it when I made God spousing videos before, and I hate that term, but marrying a God videos before, make sure you are old enough wherever you are on the planet Earth in 2021 to be legally married to a flesh and blood person. I can't say that enough. We all go through different stages in our life, and I know if you're not old enough to get married yet in the flesh and blood, you're kind of pissed off with me right now, but hear me out on this. You go through all sorts of stages of love. If you find those old-timey videos about, what is love and stuff like that, they'll tell you when you're very young, you have love for your family and you have love for your parents and you love your pets. You get a little older and maybe you love someone, but it's not really serious. And then you go through what we call puppy love. It's a first love and it is love and it can't hurt to fall out of that love and you'll fall in love many, many times before you find the one. And if we could have all done, like, had I been able to run around away at 14 years old and married a rock star, I would hope they would be decent enough not to marry a 14-year-old child. I would have messed my life up. Same thing if I could have ran away at 16. Teenage girls are the worst for a long span of time. By the time I hit 18 and I realized what I would have thrown away had I been able to run away from the ages of 14 on, I thanked my lucky stars that I never found anyone that was like, yeah, I would totally marry a child of 14. I am so thankful that never happened to me. And I am so thankful that by the time you hit 18, your hormones and everything do start to settle down, even though we now know you're not really an adult until sometime in your 20s. But I was so happy that that didn't happen to me. It's the same reason, we don't let you marry in the flesh and blood, why you shouldn't consider, marrying a god. Because you want to give yourself time to discover who you are. You want to at least get that high school diploma. And then, do you want to go to a trade school? Do you want to go on to college? Get that stuff done first. If a god truly wants to marry you, believe me, they will be decent and they will wait and you can go through the dating period and you can go through the period of between the time that, they would say, "Hey, I'm interested," and the time you are ready for marriage. You can take that time to study about them and maybe you'll find out you're not a good fit and you'll have a couple years together. And before the marriage, say like you're 18, you've graduated high school and somebody, comes to you and proposes, you can say, well, tell you this, I want to go to trade school for 2 years. I want to go to college for 4 years. Take that time, do your studies, in school and study about the God. And that way you have, like, say, a dating period, a grace period, whatever you want to see it as. And then you can truly decide after several years of studying this God, am I ready for this big of commitment? Because you have to know what they want you to commit to. Do they want you to commit to a lifetime of exclusively to them? Or are they open? Or what do they want? And you also want to give yourself time to, date so that you don't regret it later on because a lifetime of commitment is a lifetime of commitment. I might have arguments with and yell at Odin and come on and say, I am now your vodka aunt and you can get a divorce. But there's really no such thing as God divorce, even though Odin and I sometimes wish it was. And he goes, I could always put poison in your coffee. Yeah, old man, I'll come and haunt you. I hate you. Yeah, I hate you too. Sometimes marriage is like that. And, understand that. Understand, as you're doing that, go around and study, what is this God known for? What is their personality like? Everything else. So first off, make sure you're of legal age and take your time to study. Take your time to enjoy yourself before you're going to commit. Second thing, if you're already in a committed relationship, like let's say you're married, or even if you're just living with someone, you owe it to that person to sit down and say, hey, I am involved. if you're involved with other gods, spirits, whatever, the rule still stands. You owe it to your significant other to sit down and say, hey, I know we're involved. We made this commitment, and whatever your vows were is what your vows were, and say, but I want to add this god in. Are you cool with that? And if they say no, then you're going to have to go back to the god and say, look, you're approaching me and I appreciate that, but my spouse is saying no. And, it's not fair to your spouse to scream and say, well, but this God wants to have a relationship and my spouse won't let me. You made your vows to your spouse first, and the God has to recognize that, and you have to recognize that too. If you no longer wish to honor those vows because the God approached you, you have to sit down and talk about that. And then you have to talk about, do you still want to, do whatever, do you still want to follow those vows? Because if just a God coming and approaching you brought that up, then, have a real talk. Some people, for example, get married and they get married in a monogamous relationship, but then as time goes on, and we're talking about all flesh and blood participants, they decide that they want to be monogamish. They can go out, but, just no serious attachments, or they can have hookups, but never ever in the home, in our bed, or, whatever they agree to. But that's between all consenting adults. So you do have to sit down and talk to that partner because you would want them to talk to you. You would not want your spouse to come home one day having married some goddess or having married some god or having had this wonderful experience and go, oh, yeah, we're still married, whatever. You wouldn't want them to do that. And certainly you don't want to have a relationship with a god where you feel like you have to sneak around. I saw this horrible blog by this woman one time where had a spouse and she's like, my spouse is fat and dumb and ugly, and she's writing this seriously, but and my kids are stupid and they scream and cry all the time, but I have this super hot god, and let me tell you about all the sex we have. And I was like, because that has nothing to do with marriage, and that's another thing to bring up. Somebody wrote a snarky article on it, but it was true. Do you want to be married to a god, as in an actual figure? Yes, these gods are real. They're not Marvel or Disney or whatever video game characters. Or are you just fangirling over Tom Hiddleston or the representation of that god that you've seen in a video game or something? There's nothing wrong with having sexual fantasies or wanting to marry a fictional character. People talk about that. But, that is about a fictional character. Marvel Loki is not Loki. I know you guys get sick of hearing it, but that is the truth, my dears. He is not Tom Hiddleston. You know, I was talking to somebody about Dionysus. Dionysus is, thank the gods, not Percy Jackson, you know, Dionysus. He is not Dionysus from Smite. He is not Dionysus from, a musical or something. He is a god, a ancient god who is proud of his age. Loki, not so much. Don't ever bring it up. Loki's forever young. Yes, darling. And I'm getting flipped off back here. You have to realize, and sit down and be serious with yourself. Are you in love with a fantasy character? Are you in love? Did you see a photo or artwork or something and fall in love with that artwork? And it can happen. Did you fall in love with a fictional representation, or did you fall in love with the god? There was this woman once that wrote this blog, and it was only one article. I never know what happened to her. She read American Gods, and I never would fall in love with Odin based on that, but she fell in love with Odin based on that. And she claimed he came into her life and romanced her. And the more I thought about it, the more trouble I had with this, because I'm thinking, I hope to God some guy in the flesh and blood didn't convince her that he is Odin, because that's not true. That's another thing we have to talk about. The gods do not come down in flesh and blood, my darlings, and live with us. Well, I wish they did, because Loki could go out and go work at the DQ or something and bring back some money for all the toys he wants. Odin could go out and grift people and, bring money back to the household. They're not going to do that. They're going to provide for you the way a divinity provides for a mortal, but they aren't going to live with us in flesh and blood. And I know that rankles people, but I'm like, with that woman, I'm like, I hope nobody, just some mortal came up to her and claimed it was Odin, because that's not how it works. And I can see why she fell in love with that fantasy. But again, they're not that fantasy character. Sure, in the fantasy world of American Gods, the gods can all come down and walk around as mortals for as long as they like. That's not what they do. And yes, it happens in the lore, but if somebody walks up to you and claims to be Odin, pop them in the nose for me, because it's not Odin. So, even if you believe in channeling, the channeler is not this empty vessel, and it would be very cruel, even if you could pay them millions of dollars a year to do it. It would be very cruel to have a channeler, not to mention it would kill them. Have a channeler be that god every day for you, not to mention it's taking advantage of a mortal and all the other implications with it. Even, people will compare it to Voodoo. Even in Voodoo, the Loa that you marry, let's say you marry a Loa, and we're talking about two different things here. You are only going to see them during your wedding ceremony, and no, you are not going to go off and have sex, because that would be tantamount to raping the horse, because they're truly not there. They're out to lunch and the Loa has taken over. Same thing with somebody being possessed by a god. It would be very cruel, even if the person wrote, their consent, to expect a person to just be this hollow vessel for you to spend as much time as you like with the god. That would be very cruel. There are people that sometimes they claim the person's clairvoyant. Sometimes the god speaks through them. But that shouldn't be anything you expect. So you should not expect some poor mortal to give up their whole essence and their whole being and, let the god walk around using their body all day. That's just not fair to the mortal. This is their life. They deserve to live it. So these are like the oddest things to have to talk about. But I'm like, well, this is what's developed in the decades since people first started talking about this. And another thing would be, okay, so we've already talked about, make sure you're old enough, make sure you know what you're committing to, make sure that if you're involved, other people, know you're getting involved. Make sure that it's not a fantasy character you're in love with, instead of the god. If it's a fantasy character, fine. It's okay to have fantasies, but, do not ask a god to marry you, because they will take that very seriously. And if a god approaches you and you marry them just because you are in love with this fantasy character, forever is a very long time. This life is a very long time. Some people who claim that gods will come up to you one day and say, oh, this is over. But you don't know that's ever going to happen. So, you are considering from the point you get married to forever married. So, I might come on, like I said, and shout, like, there's now God divorce. I grant you divorce as your vodka aunt. But I've never really heard of it. There's one book on Odin where she claimed somebody's, God spousey to relationship with Odin, ended. They can end it and then they can start it again because they're the gods. So once you've made that commitment, once those words leave your lips, just expect that. Like with Dionysus, we will be very involved. I won't see him for a while. And, they will sweet talk you sometimes, and they'll do the courtship and be all flirty and everything. And they'll get you into, like, say we're married, and you agree. They can come back anytime. You might not see them for a year or so, but then they can come back into your life. I was saying the first attempt when the damn microphone wasn't working, I said, the greatest fear would be for people that were rather libertine in their younger years, for all those gods to come back at once and be like, honey, I'm home. And they would all be there at once and they'd be like, you love me, right? And look, he's like, yeah, I know what I'm gonna do to you. And, that would be a terror. So if you were a libertine, for example, say you never got married, but you had 20, 30 different relationships because you were just going, wow, let's just say you did this, okay? Can you imagine if they all showed up at once and they were all like, hey, you might have not thought anything of it and you thought we were just having fun. Well, I am madly in love with you. We're married now. I'm moving in with you. And you'd be like, wait, what? You all bringing stimulus checks with you? Because this is a lot of a lot. And, so you have to kind of have your even kill. I got off track there, but I'm like thinking of 30 gods showing up at once. And, like he's giggling, but, that's another thing too. How many do you want? You have to put a cap on it at some point. If you were rather libertine about your promises when you were younger because you really didn't take stuff seriously and you got into all these relationships, then you do have to go back to them and say, "Hey, you probably heard somehow I agreed to marry X, Y, and Z, but I just want to make sure that, you're not going to show up 2 days after the wedding and say, "Hey, guess what? I've decided we're married because you were involved with me really intensely for a couple months. You do want to go back and do that." I don't judge people for just dating and hooking up or living together for a while with a god, but they may totally come back into your life and go, "Remember me? Yeah, you should be married to me is who you should be married to." Great fun. So, I probably left stuff out there, but the first time, I didn't have the recording button on. One second, guys. These dang allergies. I did it so well the first time. Sorry. Whew, sorry about that, guys. But yeah, just to recap, make sure you're old enough. Make sure you have had the experiences you want to have in life before you make a commitment, obviously. Make sure you know what you're committing to. Make sure you know what the God wants, and make sure that what the God wants is not completely different from the fantasy in your head. You might be thinking, "Hey, just 5 minutes so often when I feel like it." That might not be what the God's asking for. The God might be asking, "No, 7 days a week. I want to see you 7 days a week. I want an altar. I want, service once a week or something." Make sure that if you have committed relationships already, that you honor those and you go to those people, gods, whomever, and you say, "Hey, I am getting I am getting married." Oh, the first attempt I said too, like let's say you live on your own and you just have not just, but you have your kids and you don't have a spouse or someone else in your life. Tell your kids. Tell your kids. I know people make fun of the idea of having a God spouse, but tell your kids that that God that you are hopefully not hiding from them, you are going to, unless your intended spouse would tell you differently and say, "Don't listen to that crazy woman." Tell your kids, "Hey, you know that God mom is, worshiping?" And they would say, "Yeah." Say, "Well, they kind of have this thing in the Catholic Church where they have a special relationship with their God. I have that with this God now." And then they'll probably be like, "Oh, okay." So that way, if you get rings or something and the kids are like, "Why?" it shouldn't be something to be ashamed of. Say, "Well, this God wanted this symbol and this is important to me, and I want to do this." Same thing for you guys, because guys never come out of the closet and talk about marrying gods or marrying goddesses. Guys are smart. Women need to communicate and tell the whole world, "I got married and I need to tell you." Guys are smart. Guys have to be doing it, but they are very reluctant to come forward. Probably because, let's admit it, the way we look at culture, we look at a woman doing it, we're like, "Oh, she's in love." We look at a guy doing it, and we're like, "You pig, you just wanted to touch a woman." So, and I'm not saying that towards guys. I love men, but that's how we treat men. We have this very toxic way of treating men that, if a woman did it, it had to be based on love, and if a guy did it, it had to be based on lust, which is not true. There are pretty awesome guys out there that I've known, guys that are at least considering romantic relationships with gods or goddesses, but they usually don't talk about it. But the same rules apply to any gender, and the same rules apply for even asexual relationships. If you're not going to have any romantic attempt, but you still want to be committed or you still want to be married, even if there's not going to be any sexual content whatsoever, you're still going to have to talk to them about, all the above. What kind of commitment do they want? Do you have prior commitments? Make sure you're old enough. Um, there will always be stuff that's going to come up, and I said in the first attempt, somebody's going to invent something to do that I'm not even going to be able to think of because the technology just isn't there or something else. But example from like the first thing, if you are old enough to come on to, whatever they are, the Reddits or the Tumblrs or something, and you were like old enough to be age appropriate for this, I get this for Loki because he's like a big kid. But if you're age appropriate enough to wear this, so like a 8-year-old kid, you're way too young to be getting married. It's okay, guys. They will wait around. They will wait around. Anything trying to marry an 8-year-old girl, get that out of your house. Just so we're clear, the gods are good about understanding our social mores now. They know we aren't living in the before long ago, centuries ago. They know we no longer marry children off at 10 or 12 or 14 or even 16. They know we don't do that. They know that there's something weird with adults that do that. So they're pretty good at, not crossing that line. Loki especially, but, Dee Dee and all the rest. they're good at not crossing that line. And, that's when you have to decide, like, if you're, somebody is telling you something about a god or something else. Sometimes we can just have fantasies, and sometimes it's a real commitment. You can ask for signs in a real commitment and you'll get them. Just having a fantasy about a god, that's fine, but, there's no sin in that. There's no idea in pagan, circles that there's a sin in that. There's no sin in people writing erotic novels about Zeus or Dionysus or anyone else. It might make anyone in a relationship with them embarrassed, and it might make the people that consider themselves children of that god go, "Ugh." But that's going to be out there since the beginning of time. Gods have been objects of sexual desire. There's nothing wrong with fantasies, but that is not the same as, having a committed relationship to an actual deity. And so that's my TED talk, and you've all been mentally scarred. But just be aware that's out there. There are people that just, I've run into people like they have a spouse and they're very immature about it. They just want to hook up and have sex with as many gods as they want. And, I served Dionysus. I served Bastet. I was brought up by Bastet, but I still have a respect for each and every partner, which you should. They're not just, it's not a conquest thing. It's not how many notches can I put on my belt, how many gods can I hook up with, how many gods can I, put the rings on for. That's not what it's about. It's about love and respect. Even if it's just a casual hookup, you should still have love and respect in consenting adults that know what's going on and know that sometimes feelings develop from, random encounters. So that's my TED talk. You're probably scarred for life, but it's stuff we have to talk about just so everybody's on the same page. So if you like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you guys later. Bye bye.